Congo Crisis. Published November the 7th, 2017. Special characters are denoted as follows. And denotes beginning and ending double quotations. And denotes left and right parentheses. Denotes an M dash. Denotes 3 consecutive periods. The Congo Crisis. In French, crise Congolese. Was a period of political upheaval and conflict in the Republic of the Congo. Today the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Between 1960 and 1965. It began almost immediately after the Congo became independent from Belgium and ended, unofficially, with the entire country under the rule of Joseph Desai Mobutu, constituting a series of civil wars. The Congo Crisis was also a proxy conflict in the Cold War, in which the Soviet Union and United States supported opposing factions. Around 100,000 people are believed to have been killed during the crisis. A nationalist movement in the Belgian Congo demanding the end of colonial rule led to the country's independence on the 30th of June 1960. Minimal preparations had been made and many issues, such as the questions of federalism and ethnicity, remained unresolved. In the first week of July, a mutiny broke out in the army and violence erupted between black and white civilians. Belgium sent troops to protect fleeing whites and 2 areas of the country, Kananga and South KC, seceded with Belgian support. Amid continuing unrest and violence, the United Nations deployed peacekeepers, but the uranium nitride Secretary-General Dag Hammarskjöld refused to use these troops to help the central government in Leopoldville fight the secessionists. Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba, the charismatic leader of the largest nationalist faction, reacted by calling for assistance from the Soviet Union, which promptly sent military advisors and other support. The involvement of the Soviets split the Congolese government and led to impasse between Lumumba and the president, Joseph Kasavubu. Mobutu, in command of the army, broke this deadlock with a coup d'état, expelled the Soviet advisors and established a new government effectively under his control. Lumumba was placed in captivity and subsequently executed in 1961. A rival government, the Free Republic of the Congo, was founded in the eastern city of Stanleyville by Lumumba supporters led by Antoine Gizenga. It gained Soviet support but was crushed in early 1962. Meanwhile, the uranium nitride took a more aggressive stance towards the secessionists after Hammarskjöld was killed in a plane crash in late 1961. Supported by uranium nitride troops, Leopoldville defeated the secessionist movements in Katanga and South KC by the start of 1963. With Katanga and South KC back under the government's control, a reconciliatory compromise constitution was adopted and the exiled Cartain's leader, Moise Tshom, was recalled to head an interim administration while fresh elections were organized. Before these could be held, however, Maoist-inspired militants calling themselves the Simbas rose up in the east of the country. The Simbas took control of a significant amount of territory and proclaimed a communist People's Republic of the Congo in Stanleyville. Government forces gradually retook territory and, in November 1964, Belgium and the United States intervened militarily in Stanleyville to recover hostages from Simba captivity. The Simbas were defeated and collapsed soon after. Following the elections in March 1965, a new political stalemate developed between Tshom and Kasavubu, forcing the government into near paralysis. Mobutu mounted a second coup d'état in November 1965, now taking personal control. Under Mobutu's rule, the Congo, renamed Zaire in 1971, was transformed into a dictatorship which would endure until his deposition in 1997. Part 1. Background. Part 1. Background. Chapter 1. Belgian Rule. Colonial rule in the Congo began in the late 19th century. King Leopold II of Belgium, frustrated by Belgium's lack of international power and prestige, attempted to persuade the Belgian government to support colonial expansion around the then largely unexplored Congo basin. The Belgian government's ambivalence about the idea led Leopold to eventually create the colony on his own account. With support from a number of Western countries, who viewed Leopold as a useful buffer between rival colonial powers, Leopold achieved international recognition for a personal colony, the Congo Free State, in 1885. By the turn of the century, however, the violence of Free State officials against indigenous Congolese and the ruthless system of economic extraction had led to intense diplomatic pressure on Belgium to take official control of the country, which it did in 1908, creating the Belgian Congo. Belgian rule in the Congo was based around the colonial trinity colonial of state, missionary and private company interests. The privileging of Belgian commercial interests meant that capital sometimes flowed back into the Congo and that individual regions became specialized. On many occasions, the interests of the government and private enterprise became closely tied, and the state helped companies with strict-breaking and countering other efforts by the indigenous population to better their lot. The country was split into nesting, hierarchically organized administrative subdivisions, and run uniformly according to a set native policy. Politique indigène. In contrast to the British and the French, who generally favored the system of indirect rule whereby traditional leaders were retained in positions of authority under colonial oversight, there was also a high degree of racial segregation. Large numbers of white immigrants who moved to the Congo after the end of World War II came from across the social spectrum, but were nonetheless always treated as superior to blacks. During the 1940s and 1950s, the Congo experienced an unprecedented level of urbanization, and the colonial administration began various development programs aimed at making the territory into a model colony. One of the results of the measures was the development of a new middle class of Europeanized African Avoles in the cities. By the 1950s, the Congo had a wage labor force twice as large as that in any other African colony. The Congo's rich natural resources, including uranium. Much of the uranium used by the U.S. nuclear program during World War II was Congolese. Led to substantial interest in the region from both the Soviet Union and the United States as the Cold War developed. Part 1. Background. Chapter 2. Politics and Radicalization. An African nationalist movement developed in the Belgian Congo during the 1950s, primarily among the Avoles. The movement was divided into a number of parties and groups which were broadly divided on ethnic and geographical lines and opposed to one another. The largest, the Movement National Congolais (MNC), was a united front organization dedicated to achieving independence within a reasonable time. It was created around a charter which was signed by, among others, Patrice Lumumba, Cyril Adou and Joseph Filio, but others accused the party of being too moderate. Lumumba became a leading figure within the MNC, and by the end of 1959, the party claimed to have 58,000 members. The MNC's main rival was the Alliance des Congo, a BKO, led by Joseph Kasavubu, who advocated a more radical ideology than the MNC, based around calls for immediate independence and the promotion of regional identity. A BKO's stance was more ethnic nationalist than a MNC's. It argued that an independent Congo should be run by the Bakongos, inheritors of the pre-colonial Kingdom of the Congo. The Confédération des Associations Tribales du Katanga, CONACAT, a localist party led by Moïse Chom, was the third major organization. It advocated federalism and primarily represented the southern province of Katanga. These were joined by a number of smaller parties which emerged as the nationalist movement developed, including the radical the Parti Solidaire Africain (PSA), and factions representing the interests of minor ethnic groups like the Alliance des Bayanzi, ABZI. Although it was the largest of the African nationalist parties, the MNC had many different factions within it that took differing stances on a number of issues. It was increasingly polarized between moderate Avolis and the more radical mass membership. A radical faction headed by Leo and Albert Kalonji split away in July 1959, but failed to induce mass defections by other MNC members. The dissident faction became known as the MNC Kalonji, MNC-K, while the majority group became the MNC Lumumba, MNC-L. The split divided the party's support base into those who endured with Lumumba, chiefly in the Stanleyville region in the northeast, and those who backed the MNC-K, which became most popular around the southern city of Elizabethville and among the Luba ethnic group. Major riots broke out in Leopoldville, the Congolese capital, on the 4th of January 1959 after a political demonstration turned violent. The Force Publique, the colonial gendarmerie, used force against the rioters. At least 49 people were killed, and total casualties may have been as high as 500. The Nationalist Party's influence expanded outside the major cities for the first time, and nationalist demonstrations and riots became a regular occurrence over the next year, bringing large numbers of black people from outside the Avolu class into the independence movement. Many blacks began to test the boundaries of the colonial system by refusing to pay taxes or abide by minor colonial regulations. The bulk of the Abiakeo leadership was arrested, leaving the MNC in an advantageous position. These developments led to the white community also becoming increasingly radicalized. Some whites planned to attempt a coup d'état if a black majority government took power. As law and order began to break down, white civilians formed militia groups known as Corps de Volontaires Européens, European Volunteer Corps, to police their neighborhoods. These militias frequently attacked blacks. Part 1. Background. Chapter 3. Independence. In the fallout from the Leopoldville riots, the report of a Belgian parliamentary working group on the future of the Congo was published, in which a strong demand for internal autonomy was noted. Auguste de Schrijver, the Minister of the Colonies, launched a high-profile round-table conference in Brussels in January 1960, with the leaders of all the major Congolese parties in attendance. Lumumba, who had been arrested following riots in Stanleyville, was released in the run-up to the conference and headed the MNC-L delegation. The Belgian government had hoped for a period of at least 30 years before independence, but Congolese pressure at the conference led to the 30th of June 1960 being set as the date. Issues including federalism, ethnicity and the future role of Belgium in Congolese affairs were left unresolved after the delegates failed to reach agreement. Belgians began campaigning against Lumumba, whom they wanted to marginalize. They accused him of being a communist and, hoping to fragment the nationalist movement, supported rival, ethnic-based parties like CONAKAT. Many Belgians hoped that an independent Congo would form part of a federation, like the French Community or British Commonwealth of Nations, and that close economic and political association with Belgium would continue. As independence approached, the Belgian government organized Congolese elections in May 1960. These resulted in a broad MNC majority. The proclamation of the Independent Republic of the Congo, and the end of colonial rule, occurred as planned on the 30th of June 1960. In a ceremony at the Palais de la Nation in Leopoldville, King Baudouin gave a speech in which he presented the end of colonial rule in the Congo as the culmination of the Belgian civilizing mission begun by Leopold II. After the king's address, Lumumba gave an unscheduled speech in which he angrily attacked colonialism and described independence as the crowning success of the nationalist movement. Although Lumumba's address was acclaimed by figures such as Malcolm X, It nearly provoked a diplomatic incident with Belgium. Even some Congolese politicians perceived it as unnecessarily provocative. Nevertheless, independence was celebrated across the Congo. Politically, the new state had a semi-presidential constitution, known as the Loi fondamentale, in which executive power was shared between president and prime minister in a system known as bicephalism. Kasavubu was proclaimed president, and Lumumba prime minister, of the Republic of the Congo. Despite the objections of CONAK80 and others, the constitution was largely centralist, concentrating power in the central government in Leopoldville, and did not devolve significant powers to provincial level. Part 2. Beginning of the crisis. Part 2. Beginning of the crisis. Chapter 1. Force publique, mutiny, racial violence and Belgian intervention. Despite the proclamation of independence, neither the Belgian nor the Congolese government intended the colonial social order to end immediately. The Belgian government hoped that whites might keep their position indefinitely. The Republic of the Congo was still reliant on colonial institutions like the Force publique to function from day to day, and white technical experts, installed by the Belgians, were retained in the broad absence of suitably qualified black Congolese replacements. Partly the result of colonial restrictions regarding higher education. Many Congolese people had assumed that independence would produce tangible and immediate social change, so the retention of whites in positions of importance was widely resented. Quote, "Independence brings changes to politicians and to civilians. But for you, nothing will be changed. None of your new masters can change the structure of an army which, throughout its history, has been the most organized, the most victorious in Africa. The politicians have lied to you." Extract from Emile Jansen's speech to the Force publique on the 5th of July 1960. Lieutenant General Emile Janssens, the Belgian commander of the Force publique, refused to see Congolese independence as marking a change in the nature of command. The day after the independence festivities, he gathered the black non-commissioned officers of his Leopoldville garrison and told them that things under his command would stay the same, summarizing the point by writing, "Before independence equals after independence," on a blackboard. This message was hugely unpopular among the rank and file. Many of the men had expected rapid promotions and increases in pay to accompany independence. On the 5th of July 1960, several units mutinied against their white officers at Camp Hardy near Fsville. The insurrection spread to Leopoldville the next day and later to garrisons across the country. Rather than deploying Belgian troops against the mutineers as Janssens had wished, Lumumba dismissed him and renamed the Force publique the Armée Nationale Congolaise, ANC. All black soldiers were promoted by at least one rank. Victor Lundela was promoted directly from sergeant major to major general and head of the army, replacing Janssens. At the same time, Joseph Dsia Mobutu, an ex-sergeant major and close personal aide of Lumumba, became Lundela's deputy as army chief of staff. The government attempted to stop the revolt. Lumumba and Kasavubu intervened personally at Leopoldville and Fsville and persuaded the mutineers to lay down their arms. But in most of the country the mutiny intensified. White officers and civilians were attacked, white-owned properties were looted and white women were raped. The Belgian government became deeply concerned by the situation, particularly when white civilians began entering neighboring countries as refugees. Lumumba's stance appeared to many Belgians to justify their prior concerns about his radicalism. On the 9th of July, Belgium deployed paratroopers, without the Congolese state's permission, in Kabila and elsewhere to protect fleeing white civilians. The Belgian intervention divided Lumumba and Kasavubu. While Kasavubu accepted the Belgian operation, Lumumba denounced it and called for all Congolese to defend our republic against those who menace it. At Lumumba's request, White civilians from the port city of Matata were evacuated by the Belgian Navy on the 11th of July. Belgian ships then bombarded the city. At least 19 civilians were killed. This action prompted renewed attacks on whites across the country, while Belgian forces entered other towns and cities, including Leopoldville, and clashed with Congolese troops. Part 2. Beginning of the crisis. Chapter 2. Katanga and South Kasai secessions. On the 11th of July 1960, Moise Tshombe, the leader of CONAK-80, declared the Congo's southern province of Katanga independent as the state of Katanga, with Elizabethville as its capital and himself as president. The mineral-rich Katanga region had traditionally shared closer economic ties with the copper belt of neighboring northern Rhodesia, then part of the Central African Federation, than with the rest of the Congo, and because of its economic importance it had been administered separately from the rest of the country under the Belgians. CONAK-80 furthermore contended that Cartane's people were ethnically distinct from other Congolese. The secession was partly motivated by the Cartane's separatists' desire to keep more of the wealth generated by the province's mining operations and to avoid sharing it with the rest of the Congo. Another major factor was what CONAK-80 held to be the disintegration of law and order in the central and northeastern Congo. Announcing Katanga's breakaway, Tshombe said, "We are seceding from chaos." The major mining company in Katanga, the, in French, Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, UMHK, had been supporting CONAK-80 during the latter days of Belgian rule amid worries that the MNC might seek to nationalize the company's assets after independence. UMHK was largely owned by the, in French, Société Générale de Belgique, a prominent holding company based in Brussels that had close ties to the Belgian government. Encouraged by the UMHK, the Belgian government provided military support to Katanga and ordered its civil servants in the region to remain in their posts. Tshombe also recruited mercenaries, mainly whites from South Africa and the Rhodesias, to supplement and command Cartane's troops. Although supported by the Belgians, Katanga never received formal diplomatic recognition from any country. The Cartane secession highlighted the fundamental weakness of the central government in Leopoldville, which had been the chief advocate of a unified state. Less than a month after the Cartane secession, on the 8th of August, a section of the region of Kasai situated slightly to the north of Katanga also declared its autonomy from the central government as the mining state of South Kasai. In French, Sud Kasai, based around the city of Bukwanga, South Kasai was much smaller than Katanga, but was also a mining region. It was largely populated by the Luba ethnic group, and its president, Albert Kalonji, claimed that the secession was largely sparked by persecution of the Baluba in the rest of the Congo. The South Kasai government was supported by, in French, Fourminière, another Belgian mining company, which received concessions from the new state in return for financial support. Part 2. Beginning of the crisis. Chapter 3. Foreign reaction and uranium nitride intervention. Disquiet about Belgium's support for the secessionist states led to calls within the United Nations. Uranium nitride. To remove all Belgian troops from the country. The Secretary-General of the Uranium Nitride, Dag Hammarskjöld, believed that the crisis would provide the organization with a chance to demonstrate its potential as a major peacekeeping force and encouraged the sending of a multinational contingent of peacekeepers to the Congo under Uranium Nitride Command. On the 14th of July, the Uranium Nitride Security Council adopted Resolution 143, calling for total Belgian withdrawal from the Congo and their replacement with a uranium nitride commanded force. The arrival of the United Nations operation in the Congo, ONUC, was initially welcomed by Lumumba and the central government, who believed the uranium nitride would help suppress the secessionist states. ONUC's initial mandate, however, only covered peacekeeping. Viewing the secessions as an internal political matter, Hammarskjöld refused to use uranium nitride troops to assist the central Congolese government against them. He argued that doing so would represent a loss of impartiality and breach Congolese sovereignty. Lumumba also sought the assistance of the United States government of Dwight D. Eisenhower, which refused. Frustrated, he turned to the Soviet Union, which agreed to provide weapons, logistical and material support. Around 1,000 Soviet military advisors soon landed in the Congo. Lumumba's actions distanced him from the rest of the government, especially Kasavubu, who feared the implications of Soviet intervention. The Americans also feared that a Soviet-aligned Congo could form the basis of a major expansion of communism into Central Africa. With Soviet support, 2,000 ANC troops launched a major offensive against South Kasai. The attack was extremely successful, but during the course of the offensive, the ANC became involved in infighting between the Baluba and Benalulua ethnic groups. As a result, the ANC perpetrated a number of large massacres of Luba civilians. Around 3,000 were killed. The violence of the advance caused an exodus of thousands of Baluba civilians who fled their homes to escape the fighting. The involvement of the Soviet Union alarmed the United States. The American government under Eisenhower, in line with Belgian criticism, had long believed that Lumumba was communist and that the Congo could be on track to become a strategically placed Soviet client state. In August 1960, Central Intelligence Agency CIA agents in the region reported to their agency that Congo is experiencing a classic communist takeover and warned that the Congo might follow the same path as Cuba. Part 3. Political disintegration. Part 3. Political disintegration. Chapter 1. Central government split and first Mobutu coup. Lumumba's appeal for Soviet support split the government and led to mounting pressure from Western countries to remove him from power. In addition, both Chom and Kalonji appealed to Kasavubu, who they believed to be both a moderate and federalist, to move against Lumumba's centralism and resolve the secession issue. Meanwhile, Mobutu took effective control of the army, routing foreign aid and promotions to specific units and officers to secure their allegiance. On the 5th of September 1960, Kasavubu announced that he had unilaterally dismissed Lumumba on national radio using the massacres in South Kasai as a pretext and with the promise of American backing. Andrew Cordia, the American uranium nitride representative in the Congo, used his position to block communications by Lumumba's faction and to prevent a coordinated MNCL reaction to the news. Both chambers of parliament, however, supported Lumumba and denounced Kasavubu. Lumumba attempted to dismiss Kasavubu from his position, but could not get support for this, precipitating a constitutional crisis. Ostensibly in order to resolve the deadlock, Joseph Dsi Mobutu launched a bloodless coup and replaced both Kasavubu and Lumumba with a College of Commissioners General. College des Commissaires Généraux, consisting of a panel of university graduates, led by Justin Bomboko. Soviet military advisors were ordered to leave. Allegedly, the coup was intended to force the politicians to take a cooling-off period before they could resume control. In practice, however, Mobutu sided with Kasavubu against Lumumba, who was placed under house arrest, guarded by Ghanaian uranium nitride troops and an outring of ANC soldiers. Kasavubu was reappointed president by Mobutu in February 1961. From the coup onwards, Mobutu was able to exert considerable power in Congolese politics behind the scenes. Following Kasavubu's reinstatement, there was an attempted rapprochement between the Congolese factions. Chom began negotiations for the end of the secession and the formation of a confederal Congo. Although a compromise agreement was reached, it was prevented from taking effect as negotiations broke down amid personal animosity between Kasavubu and Chom. An attempted reconciliation in July 1961 led to the formation of a new government, led by Cyril Adula, which brought together deputies from both Lumumbist and South Kasi factions but also failed to bring a reconciliation with Katanga. Members of the MNCL fled to Stanleyville where, led by Antoine Gizenga, they formed a rebel government in November 1960 in opposition to the central government in Leopoldville. The Gizenga government was recognized by some states, including the Soviet Union and China, as the official government of the Congo and could call on approximate 5,500 troops compared to the central government's 7,000. Faced with uranium nitride pressure, the Gizenga government however collapsed in January 1962 after Gizenga was arrested. Part 3. Political Disintegration. Chapter 2. Killing of Lumumba. Lumumba escaped house arrest and fled eastwards towards Stanleyville where he believed he could rally support. Pursued by troops loyal to Mobutu, he was captured at Port Franqui on the 1st of December 1960 and flown back to Leopoldville with his hands bound. Despite uranium nitride appeals to Kosovo for due legal process, the Soviet Union denounced the uranium nitride as responsible for the arrest and demanded his release. A meeting of the Uranium Nitride Security Council was called on the 7th of December 1960 to consider Soviet demands that the uranium nitride seek Lumumba's immediate release, his restoration to the head of the Congolese government and the disarming of Mobutu's forces. The pro-Lumumba resolution was defeated on the 14th of December 1960 by a vote of 8-2. Still in captivity, Lumumba was tortured and transported to Thsville and later to Katanga, where he was handed over to forces loyal to Shom. On the 17th of January 1961, Lumumba was executed by Cartain's troops near Elizabethville. News of the execution, released on the 13th of February, provoked international outrage. The Belgian embassy in Yugoslavia was attacked by protesters in Belgrade, and violent demonstrations occurred in London and New York. Shortly thereafter 7 Lumumbists, including the first president of Oriental Province, Jean-Pierre Finant, were executed in South Kasi for crimes against the Baluba nation. Gas and gas soldiers then shot 15 political prisoners in retaliation, including Lumumba's dissident Minister of Communications, Alphonse Songolo. Historian M. Crawford Young writes that the assassinations signified, without a doubt, the nadir of the Congo crisis. Part 3. Political Disintegration. Chapter 3. United Nations Escalation and the End of the Cartain Secession. Since its initial resolution of July 1960, the uranium nitride had issued further resolutions calling for the total withdrawal of Belgian and mercenary forces from Katanga in progressively stronger terms. By 1961, ONUC comprised nearly 20,000 men. Although their mandate prevented them from taking sides, ONUC had a mandate to arrest foreign mercenaries wherever they encountered them. In September 1961, an attempt to detain a group of Cartain's mercenaries without violence during Operation Martha went wrong and turned into a firefight. ONUC's claim to impartiality was undermined in mid-September when a company of Irish uranium nitride troops were captured by numerically superior Cartain's forces following a 6-day siege in Jadotville. Katanga proceeded to hold the Irishmen as prisoners of war, a development that deeply embarrassed the uranium nitride mission and its proponents. On the 18th of September 1961, Hamas jailed Flute and Ola just across the border in northern Rhodesia to attempt to broker a ceasefire between uranium nitride and Cartain's forces. His aircraft crashed before landing at Ndola Airport, killing him and everybody else on board. In stark contrast to Hamas Joel's attempts to pursue a moderate policy in the Congo, his successor Youth Ant supported a more radical policy of direct involvement in the conflict. Katanga released the captured Irish soldiers in mid-October as part of a ceasefire deal in which ONUC agreed to pull its troops back. A propaganda coup for Shom. restated American support for the uranium nitride mission, and the murder of 10 Italian uranium nitride pilots in Port Mapon in November 1961, strengthened international demands to resolve the situation. In December 1961, South Kasai was finally overrun by ANC troops and Kalonji was arrested, ending the South Kasai secession. Resolution 169, issued in November 1961, called for ONUC to respond to the deteriorating human rights situation and prevent the outbreak of full-scale civil war. The resolution completely rejected Katanga's claim to statehood and authorized ONUC troops to use all necessary force to assist the central government of the Congo in the restoration and maintenance of law and order. The Cartains made further provocations and, in response, ONUC launched Operation Unocat to dismantle Cartain's roadblocks and seize strategic positions around Elizabethville. Faced with international pressure, SHOM signed the Kitona Declaration in December 1962 in which he agreed in principle to accept the authority of the central government and state constitution and to abandon any claim to Cartain's independence. Following the declaration, however, talks between SHOM and Adula reached a deadlock, while Cartain's forces continued to harass uranium nitride troops. Diminishing support and Belgium's increasing reluctance to support Katanga demonstrated that the state could not survive indefinitely. On the 11th of December 1962, Belgian Foreign Minister Paul-Henri Spaak declared that the Belgian government would support the uranium nitride or the Central Congolese government should they attempt to end the Cartain secession through force. On the 24th of December 1962, uranium nitride troops and Cartain's gendarmes clashed near Elizabethville and fighting broke out. After attempts to reach a ceasefire failed, uranium nitride troops launched Operation Grand Slam and occupied Elizabethville, prompting SHOM to leave the country. A ceasefire was agreed soon thereafter. Indian uranium nitride troops, exceeding their orders, then occupied Jadotville, preventing Cartain's loyalists from regrouping. Gradually, the uranium nitride overran the rest of the Katanga and, on the 21st of January 1963, SHOM surrendered his final stronghold of Kolwezi, effectively ending the Cartain secession. Part 3, Political Disintegration. Chapter 4, Attempted Political Reconciliation. Following the end of the Katanga secession, political negotiations began to reconcile the disparate political factions. The negotiations coincided with the formation of an émigré political group, the Conseil National de Libération (CNL), by dissident Lumumbists and others in neighboring Congo-Brazzaville. The negotiations culminated in the creation of a new, revised constitution, known as the Lubumbashi Constitution, after the city in which it was written, to create a compromise balance of power. The new constitution increased the power of the presidency, ending the system of joint consultation between president and prime minister, and appeased federalists by increasing the number of provinces from 6 to 21 while increasing their autonomy. The constitution also changed the name of the state from the Republic of the Congo to Democratic Republic of the Congo. The constitution was passed in a constitutional referendum in June 1964 and parliament was dissolved to await new elections. Kasavubu appointed SHOM, the exiled Cartain's leader, as interim prime minister. Although personally capable, and supported as an anti-communist by Western powers, SHOM was denounced by other African leaders such as King Hassam II of Morocco as an imperialist puppet for his role in the Cartain secession. Under SHOM's interim government, fresh elections were scheduled for the 30th of March and the rebellion broke out in the central and eastern parts of the Congo. Part 4, Kwilu and Simba rebellions. The period of political crisis had led to widespread disenchantment with the central government brought in by independence. Demands for a second independence from kleptocracy and political infighting in the capital grew. The Second Independence slogan was taken up by Maoist-inspired Congolese revolutionaries, including Pierre Moulel, who had served in a junior capacity in the Lumumba government. The political instability of the Congo helped to channel wider discontentment into outright revolt. Disruption in the rural Congo began with agitation by Lumumbists, led by Moulel, among the Penda and Mbundu peoples. By the end of 1963, there was unrest in regions of the central and eastern Congo. The Kwilu Rebellion broke out on the 16th of January 1964 in the cities of Idiofa and Gungu in Kwilu province. Further disruption and uprisings then spread to Kivu in the east and later to Albertville, sparking further insurrection elsewhere in the Congo and the outbreak of the larger Simba Rebellion. The rebels began to expand their territory and rapidly advances northwards, capturing Port-Mpain, Stanleyville, Paulus and Lizala between July and August. The rebels, who called themselves Simbas, from the Kiswahili for lion, had a populist but vague ideology, loosely based on communism, which prioritized equality and aimed to increase overall wealth. Most of the active revolutionaries were young men who hoped that the rebellion would provide them with opportunities which the government had not. The Simbas used magic to initiate members and believed that, by following a moral code, they could become invulnerable to bullets. Magic was also very important to the rebels, who also made extensive use of witchcraft to protect themselves and also demoralize their ANC opponents. As they advanced, the rebels perpetrated numerous massacres in the territory they captured in order to remove political opposition and terrorize the population. ONUC was in the process of withdrawing when the rebellion started and had only 5,500 personnel, most whom were deployed in the eastern part of the country and stranded by the conflict. Straggling Western missionaries retreated to their respective embassies, which in turn requested uranium nitride assistance. A small force of peacekeepers was assembled and subsequently dispatched to the Kwilu region to retrieve fleeing missionaries. Rescue operations continued throughout March and April and resulted in the successful recovery of over 100 missionaries. The rebels founded a state, the People's Republic of the Congo, République Populaire du Congo, with its capital at Stanleyville and Christophe Kpeni as president. The new state was supported by the Soviet Union and China, which supplied it with arms, as did various African states, notably Tanzania. It was also supported by Cuba, which sent a team of over 100 advisors led by Che Guevara to advise the Simbas on tactics and doctrine. The Simba Rebellion coincided with a wide escalation of the Cold War amid the Tonkin Gulf incident, and it has been speculated that, had the rebellion not been rapidly defeated, a full-scale American military intervention could have occurred as in Vietnam. Part 4, Kwilu and Simba Rebellions. Chapter 1, Suppression and Belgian and American Intervention. From the end of August 1964 the rebels began to lose ground to the ANC. Albertville and Lizala were recaptured in late August and early September. Shom, backed by Mobutu, recalled many of his former mercenaries from the Cartane secession to oppose the Simba. The mercenaries, led by Mad Mike Hoare and mostly whites from Central and Southern Africa, were formed into a unit known as 5 Commando ANC. 5 Commando served as the spearhead of the ANC, but were known for widespread and sanctioned killing, torture, looting and mass rapes in recaptured rebel areas. In a press interview, Hoare himself described his men as appalling thugs. The mercenaries were also materially supported by the CIA. In November 1964, the Simbas rounded up the remaining white population of Stanleyville and its environs. The whites were held hostage in the Victoria Hotel in the city to use as bargaining tools with the ANC. In order to recover the hostages, Belgian parachute troops were flown to the Congo in American aircraft to intervene. On the 24th of November, as part of Operation Dragon Rouge, Belgian paratroopers landed in Stanleyville and quickly secured the hostages. In total, Around 70 hostages and 1,000 Congolese civilians were killed, but the vast majority were evacuated. The Belgian troops were only under orders to liberate the hostages, rather than push the Simbas out of the city, but the attack nevertheless broke the back of the Eastern insurrection, which never recovered. The paratroopers and the civilians then returned to Belgium. In the aftermath of the intervention, Belgium itself was publicly accused of neo-colonialism. As a result of the intervention, Tshoma lost the support of Kasavubu and Mobutu and was dismissed from his post as Prime Minister in October 1965. Soon after, Dragon Rouge, ANC and mercenary troops captured Stanleyville, putting an end to the Simba rebellion. Pockets of Simba resistance continued to hold out in the eastern Congo, most notably in South Kivu, where Laurent Desire Kabila led a Maoist cross-border insurgency which lasted until the 1980s. Part 5. Second Mobutu coup d'état. In the scheduled March 1965 elections, Tshomba's Convention Nationale Congolaise (CONCO) won a large majority of the seats, but a large part of his party soon defected to form the new Front Démocratique Congolais (FDC), making the overall result unclear as CONCO controlled the Chamber of Deputies while the FDC controlled the Senate. Kasavubu, attempting to use the situation to block Tshoma, appointed an anti-Tshoma leader, Evariste Kimba of the FDC, to be Prime Minister designate in November 1965, but the largely pro-Tshoma parliament refused to ratify the appointment. Instead of seeking a compromise candidate, Kasavubu again unilaterally declared Kimba to be Prime Minister, which was again rejected, creating a political deadlock. With the government in near paralysis, Mobutu seized power in a bloodless coup, ostensibly to stop the political deadlock, on the 25th of November 1965. Under the auspices of a régime d'exception, the equivalent of a state of emergency, Mobutu assumed sweeping, almost absolute, power for 5 years, after which, he claimed, democracy would be restored. Mobutu's coup, which promised both economic and political stability, was supported by the United States and other Western governments. Initially, his rule met widespread popularity. He increasingly took other powers, abolishing the post of Prime Minister in 1966 and dissolving Parliament in 1967. Part 6. Aftermath and Legacy. Once established as the sole source of political power, Mobutu gradually consolidated his control in the Congo. The number of provinces was reduced, and their autonomy curtailed, resulting in a highly centralized state. Mobutu increasingly placed his supporters in the remaining positions of importance. In 1967, to demonstrate his legitimacy, he created a party, the Mouvement Populaire de la Révolution (MPR), which until 1990 was the nation's only legal political party under Mobutu's new constitution. In 1971, the state was renamed Zaire and efforts were made to remove all colonial influences. He also nationalized the remaining foreign-owned economic assets in the country, including the UMHK, which became Jaka Mines. Despite initial successes, by the time of its disestablishment, Mobutu's rule was characterized by widespread cronyism, corruption and economic mismanagement. In the years after the Congo crisis, Mobutu was able to remove many opposition figures from the crisis who might threaten his control. Tshoma was sent into a second exile in 1965 after being accused of treason. Between 1966 and 1967, 2 mutinies in Stanleyville broke out involving up to 800 Cartains, gendarmes and former mercenaries of Tshoma. The mutinies were eventually repressed. In 1967, Tshoma was sentenced to death in absentia, and the same year was kidnapped in an airplane hijacking and held under arrest in Algeria. His death in 1969, allegedly from natural causes, has provoked speculation that the Mobutu government may have been involved. Mulel was also lured back to the Congo from exile by the promise of an amnesty, but was tortured and murdered. Part 6. Aftermath and Legacy. Chapter 1. Political Legacy. The issues of federalism, ethnicity in politics and state centralization were not resolved by the crisis and partly contributed to a decline in support for the concept of the state among Congolese people. Mobutu was strongly in favor of centralization, and one of his first acts, in 1965, were to reunify provinces and abolish much of their independent legislative capacity. Subsequent loss of faith in central government is one of the reasons that the Congo has been labeled as a failed state, and has contributed violence by factions advocating ethnic and localized federalism. Local insurgencies continued in the eastern Congo into the 1980s, left a legacy of instability along the Congo's eastern borders. Laurent Desire Kabila, who had led an anti-Mobutu insurrection during the crisis, succeeded in deposing Mobutu in 1997. His son, Joseph Kabila, is the incumbent president of the restored Democratic Republic of the Congo. Following the fall of Mobutu, Antoine Gizenga founded a political party, the Parti Lumumba's Unifi (PLU), and was elected prime minister in 2006. Part 6. Aftermath and Legacy. Chapter 2. Historical Controversy. The presentation of the Congo crisis, and particularly the role of Western intervention, has been controversial, and academics have accused various governments of distortion. In Belgium, allegations of Belgian complicity in the killing of Lumumba led to a state-backed inquiry and subsequent official apology for moral responsibility, though not direct involvement, in the assassination in 2001. In the United States, the multi-volume official history of the American Foreign Service, Foreign Relations of the United States, was accused by academics of being deliberately misleading about American involvement in the crisis and in the installation of Mobutu. Part 7. International Importance. The turmoil of the Congo crisis destabilized Central Africa and helped to ignite the Portuguese colonial war, especially the War of Independence in neighboring Angola. Angolan nationalists had long had close ties with the Congo, where many had lived as exiles. The União dos Povos de Angola (UPA), an Angolan nationalist organization which drew support from the Angolan de Congo, was supported by AKO politicians who had hopes of rebuilding the Kingdom of Congo, altering the borders established during the colonial period. Believing that the independence of Congo was the first stage in this process, the UP launched the Bikes de Cassandre revolt in 1961, igniting the conflict in Angola that would last until 1974. The Congolese, later Zairian, governments continued to provide support to Angolan rebels and even participated directly in the subsequent Angolan Civil War. The crisis caused the newly independent African states to reconsider their allegiances and internal ties. In particular, it led to the division of African states into factions. Moderate-leaning states joined the Brazzaville Group, which called for a degree of unity between Francophone African states and the maintenance of ties with France. Radical states joined the Casablanca Group, which called for a Pan-African federation. The chaotic violence of the crisis and the fate of the country's whites, many of whom entered northern and southern Rhodesia as refugees, contributed to the widespread belief among whites there that black nationalist politicians were not ready to govern, and prompted fears that immediate majority rule in Rhodesia might lead to a similar situation. After negotiations with Britain repeatedly broke down, Southern Rhodesia's predominantly white government declared independence unilaterally in 1965. The Carthage's secession would prove to be politically influential in Africa. During the Chadian Civil War between 1965 and 1979, the Front de Libération Nationale du Tchad (FROLINT) explicitly rejected secessionism in its bid to remove the Southern-backed government of François Tombalbaye following the experience of the Katanga secession, officially stating that there will be no Katanga in Chad. In the Nigerian Civil War, between 1967 and 1970, the ethnically Igbo region of Biafra seceded from Nigeria, which is accused of privileging the interests of northern ethnic groups and discriminating against the Igbo. The secessions of Biafra and Katanga have frequently been compared in academic writing. Unlike Katanga, Biafra achieved limited official international recognition and rejected the support of Western multinational companies involved in the local oil industry. Biafra was defeated in 1970 and reintegrated into Nigeria. This recording is a derivative work from Wikipedia. For more information, please visit www.frogcast.org.